Good morning, Prism mates. So good to see you when I can share with you something no one is talking about. It seems to me that when you watch the evening news, cable news, or when you watch other shows that deal with legal topics, they tend to cluster around all of the same things. And sometimes when there is a cluster fromage going on, when there are lots of hot and distracting topics that the Trump administration is throwing in our way, we miss the things we love to see. I love to see it. I love to see, and I want you to hear about when we have victories at the United States Supreme Court. Why is it that we can't spread that joy? I don't know. Maybe when something good happens, mainstream media, even the progressive news stations, don't want to talk about it. Or maybe they don't think it's important. I do. So that is why I am beginning the show with a case that was a huge victory for anyone who cares about the Constitution, immigrants, and also wants to tell Ron DeSantis of Florida to suck it. Because that's what the Supreme Court did yesterday. And I want to take a dive into this because these details are going to make you feel good and make you feel smart. So let's start there. Yesterday, in a one sentence decision, one or two sentences, I'm going to show it to you. The United States Supreme Court denied the Attorney General of Florida his emergency motion to let him go ahead and enforce this odious, onerous, hateful law that Governor DeSantis signed in February, right? So in shorthand is that the Supreme Court blocked this extreme law. Now, let's talk about that law. This law in Florida made it a crime if you were undocumented to cross into Florida. So that would mean if you were going to Florida for agriculture or other work, and you looked brown, they could stop you and ask you for your papers. And you know that actually happened. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. And that happened to a U.S. citizen who was imprisoned, despite the fact that he showed the judge that he was a U.S. citizen. So we're going to talk about that again. But the bottom line is this law has been blocked. And what was really bad about this is it came with mandatory prison terms. There was a misdemeanor and a felony level. So there are all kinds of reasons you might be literally undocumented. You may have come into the United States with asylum, granted asylum. There might be other reasons. You might be in the United States on vacation, etc. So the idea is Florida wanted the ability to basically take over and have its local and state law enforcement be the bad guys and enforce immigration law. So what happened? Let's go through this. And I'm going to blow this up to get out of your way. Here's the deal. There's Ron DeSantis, and he passed this sweeping law, again, that gave the local governments in Florida the power to partner with federal immigration efforts, and they would basically make it a crime. It would be a felony in Florida to enter Florida if you were if you were an undocumented immigrant, right? And in addition, not only would it do that, it allowed Florida to put you in prison, pre-trial detention with no opportunity for a bond. Okay, it's crazy. And these, this was the plan. And as you can imagine, this might sound familiar. You might be saying, doesn't the federal government do that? Yeah, it's actually a problem. But what's worse here is they would be adding a state felony just for coming into Florida undocumented, which allowed them to round anyone up they wanted to and say, where are your papers? And if you didn't have papers to show them, right, you speak with a Russian accent, although so far I haven't heard about any people who are of Russian nationality being wrapped up in this. but you look brown or you're speaking Spanish and you don't have your passport with you, right? Or you don't have your birth certificate. Who drives around with those? Also, not everyone has a passport. Not everyone has their birth certificate with them. I don't walk around with these. They could take you into custody and put you in prison before trial. And again, like we had this American who said, I'm here lawfully. There was nothing he could do. We can talk a little more about what happened to him. He's obviously free now. Now, let's talk a little bit more about this. Who brought this case, right? This case was brought, the lawyers who brought the case were from the ACLU and the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project and Americans for Immigrant Justice. So these two organizations, staffed by lawyers, filed a federal lawsuit challenging the state Florida law that we just talked about. And they brought this lawsuit on behalf of various farm worker organizations and individuals. So they brought this on behalf of the Farm Workers Association of Florida, the Florida Immigration Coalition, and individual plaintiffs. And this included people who have lived in Florida for a long time, and they're there pending immigration applications, as well as U.S. citizen family members who rely on them for care. So let's take a look at the people, right? These cases are about people, not just principles. And I think we should remember that. I hear a lot of lawyers talking about rule of law this, rule of law that. And yes, I believe we should have a nation of laws and not a nation of men. But sometimes people sound like they're writing an 8th grade essay in a civics class. And they have forgotten that the idea of being rule of law or a nation of law and not a nation of men is an ideal. And as you know from my work on white collar crime and about money, law, and power, we all know that it's the exception to the rule that people who have white, wealthy, and well-connected are held accountable. We've seen that again and again. Do I want it to change? Yes. But let's not pretend that it was just yesterday that rule of law got smashed. What's happened now, though, is it's been entirely disregarded, and that's why we are in an authoritarian state. What's good, though, is at least here the Supreme Court said no to Florida. Okay, so let's look again who the people are. Not the principles, but the people who matter here. These are folks, this is the Facebook banner photo for the Farm Workers Association of Florida. They've been around since 1983, and their motto is building power among farm workers for 40 years. Great organization. So they're the plaintiffs here. Okay, what happens next? This lawsuit is filed, right, in April, challenging the law. And we have these folks go into court and ask for what's called a temporary restraining order. You've heard about these, right? This happens where you bring a lawsuit to enjoin the effectiveness of this law. And I know it was signed in February. I'm not sure if it just went into effect in April. I'm not sure why they brought it then, but they go into court. This is this ACLU plus organization on behalf of the farm workers, organizations and individuals and their families. Go into court and say to the judge, look at this ridiculous Florida law. It is terrible. We need it to be stopped. And she did issue that temporary restraining order. The next step would be the preliminary injunction. Now let's talk about the grounds that she did that on, right? She said that she was going to enter she entered this temporary restraining order on the date was April 4th. Okay. And I'm going to tell you the reasons in a second, but she said, okay, temporary restraining order, this law cannot go into effect. And she said that she would be setting a hearing for April 18th, right? 14 days later. And then she would decide whether she would put a preliminary injunction in effect. Okay. So what was her reasoning here for saying that this law had to be stopped, right? When you win a temporary restraining order, which they did, it's because the judge decides you're likely to succeed on the merits and that you would suffer irreparable injury if this unless the judge rules for you. So in this case, the judge was persuaded that they were likely to succeed on the merits, that these plaintiffs, these farm workers and the organizations would be irreparably harmed. And on balance, the harm to them would be greater than the harm to the government, right, the Florida. So the two grounds were the U.S. Constitution Supremacy Clause and Commerce Clause. And to blow this up, let me just make this so you can see it better. To blow this up, you can see here that the bottom line here in the middle here was that they were likely to succeed on the merits. And the judge decided that this Florida law violated the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution because it created, and I'm quoting her, a statutory scheme in an area exclusively reserved for the federal government that conflicts with existing federal immigration law and its enforcement. And she also agreed that the law from Florida ran afoul of the Commerce Clause's implicit limitation on states' powers to restrict the interstate movement of people, right? So that is, she decided they made that showing of likelihood of succeeding on the merits. Okay, so that sounds good. But then what happens? What happens next is Attorney General of Florida, James Udheimer, enters the chat. You just heard April 4th, judge enters a restraining order on this terrible Florida law, right? Judge says, this is what I'm doing, 14 days, let's have the preliminary injunction hearing, and I'll decide whether I'm going to put this in place and keep it in place until the trial moves forward. So what does the state attorney general of Florida do? He says, F off, judge. Well, not quite like that. He sends a message, like a letter to law enforcement, the sheriffs in Florida, and said, I can't stop you from enforcing this law. And then this is what happened next. Do you remember Juan Carlos Lopez Gomez? I've referred to his case here, but this was a situation where this was a U.S. citizen. He was finally released. This happened in April. He was released from jail after he was arrested under Florida's new immigration law. He was, I think, driving in a car with friends from Georgia into Florida and pulled over, and they ended up locking him up. This whole long story, and he goes before a state law judge, and she says, I can't do anything about this. And then eventually he was let go. This happened after the judge, here she is, where I'm going to show you, this is Judge Kathleen Williams, a federal judge, had said this law is not enforceable, right? And still, Florida sheriff was deciding to lock this kid up, put him in pretrial detention. He was a U.S. citizen, didn't have his papers to show, locked him up. Even though they had brought the papers to state court showing, I think it was his passport or what have you, the state law judge couldn't do anything. This is because the Attorney General of Florida defied this federal judge's order. So what happens next? Right? What happens next is, I think you're going to like this. He effed around and found out. So basically, this is after this kid is put in custody. The Attorney General greenlights arrests under the suspended Florida immigration law. Now, there was a sheriff who said, I don't know about that. We take our directions on something like that from the judge, not anybody else. This is the Florida Attorney General. So after that happened, the judge held, I'm giving you all the details here, but the judge did hold that preliminary injunction hearing. And then she the next day rules that, it was on the 18th, she held it. About 10 days later, she granted the preliminary injunction. Okay. So as you can see, the minute the law was challenged, it was frozen, and she enters this preliminary injunction. Well, Florida did not want to take it lying down. But what ended up happening next is she hears about, after she enters this preliminary injunction, and then she wants to hear from the Attorney General as to why she should not hold him in contempt of court, in civil contempt of court, because he's telling these sheriffs to go ahead and ignore the law, which they did. So what does the judge do? Holds this guy in contempt. And this is one of my favorite things I've ever seen a judge write. We get to Lewis Carroll here. So here we go. This is in her order where she holds again Ottmeyer in contempt. Conclusion. Kathleen Williams says this. Over a century ago, author and sometimes logician Lewis Carroll guided readers through The Looking Glass. Among the adventures there, we encounter a character who boasts of his mastery of words. When I use a word, Humpty Dumpty said, in a rather scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. The question is, said Alice, whether you can make words mean so many different things. Then the judge writes, the answer then, as now, is no. Litigants cannot change the plain meaning of words as it suits them, especially when conveying a court's clear and unambiguous order. Fidelity to the rule of law can have no other meaning. And then she said, therefore, it is ordered and adjudged as follows. The court finds Ottmeyer in civil contempt of the court's April 18th order, requiring defendants to provide actual notice of the TRO to any law enforcement officer with power to enforce. Right? She said that at the preliminary injunction hearing. Ottmeyer shall file bi-weekly reports detailing whether any arrests, detentions, or law enforcement actions pursuant to that law have occurred. And then she said the first report would have to be there by July. Great. You love to see it. And then finally, done and ordered. And that was June 17th. Well, that was not the end of the story because, my friends, this is a preliminary injunction that was put in place and a contempt order with reporting required, right? That happened. So that happens in June. Well, the case is being appealed, right? A federal court, this is in Southern Florida. Judge Kathleen Williams said you cannot enforce this disgusting immigration law, Florida. And so Florida appealed it to a federal circuit court who they appeal it and ask for an emergency order at the United States Supreme Court. Again, it's Florida. But Donald Trump's administration enters the process and submits to the Supreme Court this notice. They want to say, we support this law. We're supporting this case in the 11th Circuit, right? Because the case has to go to the 11th Circuit first. But they decided they want to jump ahead, this is Florida, to the Supreme Court. So Donald Trump sends a briefing saying, we love this Florida law. And then we get to yesterday. Victory, victory, victory. Yesterday, this is the order. It's one sentence. This is Ottmeyer. I keep calling him by the wrong name. That's okay. Ottmeyer, Florida Attorney General versus Florida Immigration Coalition et al. Right? He's challenging it because he lost. Here's what the court wrote. The application for stay presented to Justice Thomas and by him referred to the court is denied. End of story. It went to Thomas because he's the Supreme Court justice who deals with those kinds of emergency motions from Florida. And the whole court was like, nah, we're not going to hear this. I love it. I love it. I love it. So bottom line is, all of that is to say, shorthand, the Supreme Court blocked this Florida law. For now, because remember, the case still has to go up to the 11th Circuit. So for now, we have a victory. The Supreme Court did not unsettle this. And I think this is marvelous. Now, friends, I won't always do this with a case, right? Usually lawyers, if they mention things like this on the news, just say the Supreme Court refuses to lift the stay, and that's confusing. So then maybe they say the Supreme Court blocked the law, and that's not accurate. So I just try to give you the whole kind of picture here. And in the end of the day, I think we'll see. But for now, the good news is Florida and no other state can try to create a felony out of being an undocumented immigrant. Right now, there is no such felony. Right now, there is not even a misdemeanor. Being in this country without documentation is not a crime. The only misdemeanor can be crossing the border unlawfully and so on. But remember, they're trying to make these folks into felons, and they are not. So this is a big victory. Now, let's talk a little bit more. Let's move over from Florida to Texas and talk about what's going on in the aftermath, still in the search and discovery efforts around the terrible flash flooding tragedy down in central Texas. There was also another flash flood out in New Mexico. Obviously, a lot of these relate to climate change and something we should all be prepared for. And there's a lot of finger pointing and blame. It turns out there's now over 200 people who have died or are missing. This is a ginormous tragedy, not the least of which is that so many that the 27 children from this summer camp have perished. So what I want to share with you first is what I think Marissa Cabas is her name, and she has a Substack called The Handbasket. She reported on this first, and now we have CNN reporting on it. So I'm going to share with you a clip from Anderson Cooper talking about how Kristi Noem, because of her takeover of FEMA, essentially, and I'm not sure if she was involved in moving funds from there to DHS, but she did not want FEMA spending money, and any amount of any authorization for spending over $100,000 had to go to her. Let's see what their accusations are here about the delay. I believe it's 72 hours between the tragedy and when she first started sending FEMA folks to Texas. Let's play this.
So according to 4 officials inside FEMA, that federal response may not have been as fast as it might have been. They say that a new rule that any expenditure over $100,000 needed sign-off from Secretary Noem slowed the federal response. These sources tell us that FEMA's deployment of urban search and rescue teams, which are typically deployed in anticipation they might be needed, instead was delayed until Monday, 3 days after the flood. Now, a source also tells us that a request Texas made for FEMA aerial imagery to aid in the search was also delayed, waiting for Secretary Noem's approval. Now, additionally, multiple FEMA officials say that they were taken aback by the agency's relatively limited response in the immediate aftermath of the disaster. CNN has reached out to FEMA for comment. So far, no reply from the agency. However, a DHS spokeswoman more generally told CNN that FEMA is, in her words, quote, shifting from bloated DC-centric dead weight to a lean deployable disaster force that empowers state actors to provide relief for their citizens.
Blaming the states. So they're saying it should be the states who do this. Let's hear a couple things on this. If the Trump administration isn't going to help the victims who died at a Christian girls' summer camp in the red state of Texas, they're not going to help anybody. I want you to hear Kristi Noem's response to this. She doesn't deny that there was this 72-hour delay, but she just blames CNN. Let's listen to what she had to say this morning with her friends at Fox.
CNN is basically got a report accusing you of slowing the process. Would you like to respond to that?
Well, there you go. Fake news. CNN again is absolutely trash what they are doing by saying that, because our Coast Guard, our Border Patrol, BORTAC teams were there immediately. Every single thing I was on, they asked for, we were there. The governor and the emergency management director, Nim Kidd, are fantastic. And nobody there has said anything about that they didn't get everything that they wanted immediately or that they needed. And I'm proud of the work that we've done to support that. But, you know, we've got flooding going on in New Mexico as well,
right.
North Carolina. So I've been visiting with their leadership team and spent quite a bit of time on the phone yesterday with the New Mexico governor, getting them resources as well. And that's what we do. And, you know, the fact that CNN is continuing to be political and push out fake information and false and information and lies is not shocking, but it's a disservice to.
Oh, please. Now, I want to share with you from Fox some questions to the local sheriff.
He's going to go with KSAT 12 in San Antonio. Question for the sheriff. The code red alert system has come under a lot of scrutiny in recent days, and now there's reports of a timeline on Friday morning where an Ingram Volunteer Fire Department commander asked a Kirk County Sheriff dispatcher for the code red to be issued. The dispatcher says, I can't, I have to get a supervisor's approval for that. Almost 6 hours passes until 10 o'clock, when 10:04, when the code red is issued. How do you account for that lapse of time? What happened and what could have happened in that time?
Okay. As I've said earlier, with every significant event, you know, with every emergency, you know what, we're going to have to, there's going to be an after action. Please, y'all, listen to those words, after action, okay? Those questions are going to be answered. I believe those questions need to be answered to the family of the missed loved ones, to the public. You know, to the people that put me in this office, those need to be, and I want that answer, and we're going to get that answer. And I know that's going to be asked over and over. Please understand that. You know, we're not running, we're not going to hide.
Hold on one second. They're going to wait to answer that question. Let's just be clear. What is the question again?
Passes until 10 o'clock, when 10:04.
I just want to look at the time frame here.
Question for the sheriff. The code red alert system has come under a lot of scrutiny in recent days, and now there's reports of a timeline on Friday morning where an Ingram Volunteer Fire Department commander asked a Kirk County Sheriff dispatcher for the code red to be issued. The dispatcher says, I can't, I have to get a supervisor's approval for that. Almost 6 hours passes until 10 o'clock, when 10:04, when the code red is issued. How do you account for that lapse of time? What happened and what could have happened in that time?
Okay. As I've said earlier, with every significant event, you know, with every emergency, you know what, we're going to have to, there's going to be an after action. Please, y'all, listen to those words, after action, okay? Those questions are going to be answered. I believe those questions need to be answered to the family of the missed loved ones, to the public, you know, to the people that put me in this office. Those need to be. And I want.
He could answer that question right now. He could answer that question right now if he wanted to, but he doesn't. Someone from the volunteer fire department or the fire department asked for a code red request. They know who they spoke with. And that person said they needed a supervisor. All you need to do is talk to that person, look at their phone records. This is bullshit.
I want that answer, and we're going to get that answer. And I know that's going to be asked over and over. Please understand that. You know, we're not running, we're not going to hide from everything. That's going to be checked into at a later time. I wish I could tell you that time. I don't know that time. Let me share something with y'all. One of the main things I've been doing is going and visiting the family. We still have some of those missed loved ones here. I'll go visit them twice a day. You know, as a sheriff, you know what I want is I want closure for those people. Okay.
This is damage control. He is going to visit the families twice a day. He could send a deputy to do that. He just needs to do it one time. This is like Uvalde, where the people who were supposed to go in and confront the shooter in the school were too scared to do it. The bottom line is there are a lot of people who failed here, and human nature is that there be failures. That's why you need redundant systems. And if the federal government has decided to defund FEMA, you know that is already a violation of law because that budget for right now was already set, right? So we've had a lot of problems here. And this is what people want. I'm not sure what to tell you, but I certainly hope that in small communities, counties and small towns and cities and the states at large, families need to demand better warning systems. When Kristi Noem was asked, what about requiring or advising towns to put out these alarms that are actually alarms that don't require you, it could be a bell on a tower that everyone can hear in the town and know there's some kind of emergency that would wake them up in the middle of the night. Is that something people should do? She said, people have to decide for themselves. You know what? No. I think there should be a role in providing federal funding to do this. I remember when federal highway funding was tied to states raising the drinking age because of car accidents from underage drinkers. You could do this. You could provide the funding both for certain warning systems. You can provide the funding, and you could also say, and if you don't decide to take our funding, we're not going to give you something else. And this could save lives. I mean, this is what an emergency management administration should be doing. This is what the federal government should be helping the states do. Okay. Now, speaking of what the federal government should be doing, Donald Trump has lost his mind. And he, as you may know, has decided that he is angry that his pal, Bolsonaro, is going to be on trial for essentially a similar thing that Donald Trump should have been tried for, but the case was dropped because he was elected. And the Supreme Court said you can't prosecute former presidents for certain kinds of actions and blah, 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 blah. And we never found out if this was Donald Trump's role in January 6th would have been the kind that was immune or not. It just got dropped. And unlike that, Bolsonaro, Brazil's prosecutors actually are prosecuting Bolsonaro for trying to interfere in the election that he lost. Well, so Donald Trump is so mad about this that he has now announced that he is going to impose a 50% tariff on all imports from Brazil. So we're talking about coffee and bananas and other items that we might buy or manufacturers might buy from Brazil. And Donald Trump said he was doing it for two reasons. One, he wants them to stop prosecuting Bolsonaro. And two, he's claiming that it makes sense because we run a trade deficit with Brazil. No, we don't. We don't. They buy much more from us than we do from them. So let's listen to what the president of Brazil, Lula, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who goes by Lula. Let's listen to what Lula had to say back to Donald Trump. This is he made this statement. Here we go. He put this out, and this was the English translation. I did not translate it from the Portuguese. In light of the public statement made by U.S. President Donald Trump on social media on the afternoon of Wednesday, the 9th, it is important to highlight the following. Brazil is a sovereign nation with independent institutions and will not accept any form of tutelage. The judicial proceedings against those responsible for planning the coup d'etat fall exclusively under the jurisdiction of Brazil's judicial branch, and as such, are not subject to any interference or threats that could compromise the independence of national institutions. In the context of digital platforms, Brazilian society rejects hateful content, racism, child pornography, scams, fraud, and speeches against human rights and democratic freedom. In Brazil, freedom of expression must not be confused with aggression or violent practices. All companies, whether domestic or foreign, must comply with Brazilian law in order to operate within our territory. Folks, footnote, that's about how they're going to block Twitter, also known as X, from Brazil. The claim regarding a U.S. trade deficit in its commercial relationship with Brazil is inaccurate. Statistics from the U.S. government itself show a surplus of $410 billion in the trade of goods and services with Brazil over the past 15 years. Therefore, any unilateral tariff increases will be addressed in accordance with Brazil's economic reciprocity law. Sovereignty, respect, and the unwavering defense of the interests of the Brazilian people are the values that guide our relationship with the world. Signed, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil. My goodness. So that's where we are. Sounds like we're going to get reciprocal tariffs on our exports to Brazil. Whew. Now, I got a couple more things for you before we get to Crazy Town. Speaking of the tariffs, as you probably know, Donald Trump is once again lying and claiming that he'd always planned for these punitive tariffs on imports from various countries to go into effect in August. That's not true. Meanwhile, I think we still have this flat rate of 10%. It's not clear to me. Wall Street seems to be throwing its hands up, Goldman Sachs and other banks, JP Morgan Chase and other banks saying, you know what? We don't know what he's going to do. He always chickens out. I even heard yesterday on the news that because these tariffs won't go into effect until August, that's after big businesses have made their shipping orders, so that won't really affect them. I'm not sure if that's true. I thought you pay the tariff when the goods come in. I don't think everything that will be on the shelves for Christmas will be here by August, but what do I know? The bottom line is, according to economist Justin Wolfers, University of Michigan, Wall Street might be making a mistake here in underestimating the madness that Donald Trump could wreak on us. Now, related to this, Donald Trump's tariff policies, taco or not, and his complete chaos when it comes to whether immigrants are going to be locked in concentration camps or flown to other countries, who is going to work in the fields, in the farms, and this idea they're going to take people who are already working on Medicaid and throw them into farms, God knows where. I don't even know what he's thinking. It's affecting the economy. And so what they really want to do is he wants the Fed to fix it. He wants Jerome Powell to be on his leash and to lower interest rates to pump up the economy. And the bottom line is that ain't going to happen. And we have Kudlow going on Fox trying to do Donald Trump's bidding by once again threatening Jerome Powell, whose term is not up yet. Remember, I think Donald Trump appointed him during his first term.
The Fed is in need of perestroika. In other words, the Fed has to be cleansed of its deep state dislike of all things Donald Trump, and frankly, its deep state bureaucratic groupthink of deadwood economists with models that haven't worked in 50 years. People who are now advising Jay Powell to fight President Trump and Mr. Trump's economic growth agenda. The next Fed chair has to go toe-to-toe with the hundreds of Fed economists who are spurring Jay Powell on his fight against Trump's tariff and reciprocity free trade policies. Also, Mr. Trump's tax cut policies. Economic growth does not cause inflation. Tariffs do not cause inflation, as per CEA Chair Stephen Myron's recent paper, and even Austin Goolsby's interview, Chicago Fed president, where Austin acknowledged the real-world fact that exporters and U.S. companies will eat the tariffs.
Not all of the tariffs. So here's the deal. Yes, Jerome Powell does go by the nickname Jay. They were going to attack him and hope that he leaves. Could Donald Trump fire him? Well, I mean, he can tell everyone they're out of a job. Would he face a lawsuit? Sure, he would. But what's really offensive is Kudlow and anyone pretending that Donald Trump is some kind of brilliant mathematician. Remember, the math doesn't math. When he yesterday literally said at a meeting when he was asked, where are you coming up with these numbers? Because now he's also putting a tariff specifically on copper. Where are you coming with these numbers? He said it's common sense. That's his math. Common sense out of Donald Trump's brain. Okay, so let's now do one last thing before Crazy Town.
Senators now Cory Booker and Alex Padilla have a new.
This is really important. I know some states are trying to do this, but U.S. senators, Democratic senators, are trying to initiate a law that would require ICE to wear, like other law enforcement officers, legible IDs, as well as no masks on their face. Couldn't be anything more important in America not to have secret police snatching people off the streets. Shouldn't be secret, shouldn't be snatching, should have due process, all the pieces. But if you start with having them be identifiable, it also helps because we literally have people pretending to be ICE and maybe abducting people, right? We have those situations.
Democratic senators now Cory Booker and Alex Padilla have a new bill out. They want to require CBP and ICE officers to have legible IDs, and they don't want CBP or ICE officers covering their faces. Would you ever sign that?
Well, they wouldn't be saying that if they didn't hate our country, and they obviously do. I'm surprised that they would do it. Knowing a little bit about them, I don't know them well, but these officers are doing a tremendous job.
Can we just take a moment here to say that no one hates America more than Donald Trump? He is extracting everything of value from this country, vacuuming out the wealth, using his position to cash in, destroying the institutions that make us great, attacking immigrants when we are a nation of immigrants, denying our progress when some of the best things we ever did was go through the civil rights movement and related reforms. He hates Americans and he hates America. So he's looking in the mirror when he says that. The other thing I want you to do is look at his face. There's something very wrong with him. The idea that no one can tell him there is something wrong with the way he makes himself up. And also the expression on the face, he looks like late Mussolini. Let's keep playing this.
They're great patriots. If you expose them because of, statements like have been made by Democrats and others on the left, usually, mostly, I think probably exclusively, you put them in great danger, tremendous danger. And
can we pause? Can we pause here and just say, who's been in danger? The federal judges. He has never spoken about the right wing, the fascist guy who went and killed pro-Trumper, MAGA guy who went in, anti-abortion right winger who went and killed a judge and in Minnesota and her husband. I'm sorry, not judge. Went and killed a state legislator and her husband, and shot another state legislator and his wife. Well, that he's now Hoffman is getting out of prison. He never talks about the liberal judges who have the one liberal judge whose son was shot. He is the one who's bringing violence on people, and he doesn't care. And there's no excuse for law enforcement not to show who they are.
it's sort of funny when people picket in front of Columbia, in front of Harvard, and they have masks on, more than masks. I mean, you can't see anything. Nobody complains about that. But
yes, they do complain about that. Wasn't there like a law passed in some states that you can't even wear masks? And doesn't he complain about that all the time? And furthermore, people who protest wearing masks if they want to, either because of COVID or because they're afraid of retribution, if they're protesting within their constitutional rights and not causing violence, what's the issue? The issue with ICE is they are violently laying hands on people and abducting them. I think there's a difference. If ICE was just standing on the sidewalk with masks saying, hey guys, we think immigrants should follow the law, that wouldn't be the same story. But nevertheless, they still should, I think, show their badges and their faces.
When a patriot who works for ICE or Border Patrol puts a mask on so that they won't recognize him and his family, so they can lead a little bit of a normal life after having worked so hard and so dangerously, there's a problem with that. So,
yeah, I'm trying to understand a couple things going on here. Why he only thinks ICE officers are the people who are entitled to safety from what is obviously too many guns in the hands of too many people in America. Separate issue. And with that, my friends, let us go to Crazy Town. Here we go. Guys, I'm going to show it to you, but let me just tease something out right now. I need you, if you are already, if you're still listening, if you have stayed for Crazy Town and you're not already a free subscriber to this show, that is crazy. You need to hit like and subscribe. Also, if you even like the show more, there's different ways that you can engage. There are different ways that you can engage, and the mods will tell you there are different levels of support. But please support us. Okay, guys, this is what is crazy. This is Donald Trump. Yesterday, oh God, there's two. This is a double header. This is Donald Trump. And hold on one second. Yeah. Where he has no clue what is going on and doesn't even realize his comments make no sense. Let's play it.
Sir, yesterday you said that you were not sure who ordered the munitions halted to Ukraine. Have you since been able to figure that out?
well, I haven't thought about it because we're looking at Ukraine right now and munitions, but I have not gone into it.
What does it say that such a big decision could be made inside your government without you knowing?
I would know. If a decision was made, I will know. I'll be the first to know. In fact, most likely I'd give the order, but I haven't done that yet.
Sure.
Yeah, please.
Sure. He didn't give the order, he would know. So how was it then? He's not admitting. How was it that munitions were halted? How was it that there was a pause? He hasn't answered. Now for a second helping of Crazy Town. Donald Trump was meeting with many different foreign officials in the White House with the cameras there. And at one point, he was meeting with President Joseph Boakai of Liberia. It's astonishing that he doesn't know the history of Liberia or anything about the country. Let me play this for you, and then we'll talk on the other side.
Thank you. And such good English, such beautiful. Where did you learn to speak so beautifully? Where were you educated? Where?
Yes, sir.
In Liberia.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's very interesting. It's beautiful English.
Sure.
I have people at this table can't speak nearly as well.
Very
and
good,
they,
sir. Thank you.
English is the language spoken in Liberia. Know something. What an utter embarrassment this man is. And with that, my friends, have a beautiful Thursday. I cannot wait. Something really, 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 really good. Last night, before I went to sleep, after I made the thumbnail, it turns out that the judge in the case, in California that Gavin Newsom brought against Donald Trump, right? Do you remember the case? He sued Donald Trump because they had they had federalized, Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth had federalized the National Guard and put them on the streets of Los Angeles. Remember that? And do you remember how we found out from the Supreme Court that it was going to be fine for those, I'm sorry, not the Supreme Court, the Ninth Circuit was, even though the judge said it's not okay to federalize them, let Gavin Newsom run them. Remember the Ninth Circuit said, no, it's cool. There's still one piece left, and that one piece is going to trial. The one piece left is, okay, fine. If these National Guard are federalized, still the legal question arises as to whether they violated the Posse Comitatus Act in what they are doing. Were they engaging, were these troops engaging in law enforcement activities? And my friends, that case is going to trial August 11th through 13th. Yes, my friend, it has been put on the docket. And you might be saying, that seems like a long time away. But I'm saying, oh my God, I have marked my calendar. So I am looking here and I did mark it, and it is August 11th through 13th. So we will be following that, I promise you. And with that, have a good night. I will see you tomorrow morning.
Hello, prison mates. It's the Taub show. Well, welcome everyone. Let's learn about what is happening in politics yesterday and today. There is hope, and we are together in this democracy we work for. And again, welcome to the Taub show. Hello, prison mates. It's the Taub show. Well, welcome everyone. Let's learn about what is happening in politics yesterday and today. There is hope, and we are together in this democracy we work for. And again, welcome to the Taub show.